Hello, everyone. Tonight, we drift into a quiet morning in Domremy, a little village where Joan of Arc grew up. Mist hangs low along the Meuse River. The thatched roofs rise like golden mushrooms, and roosters compete as if they're auditioning for a 15th century talent show. You yawn, pull a rough linen shirt over your shoulders, and the cool earth beneath your bare feet instantly reminds you this is not a 4-star hotel. You probably wouldn't survive this life sleeping on straw church bells clanging before sunrise and not a drop of espresso to save you. But here, there's a rhythm. Cows lowing bread baking and leaves whispering hints of stories about to begin. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now then, turn off the lights, maybe let a fan hum for background music, and let's enjoy tonight's journey together. Titas, you shuffle outside still half asleep and find Joan's father herding the goats while her mother claps wooden spoons to marshal the children toward their chores. Domremy is less a village and more a living clock, and you're just one of its ticking gears. The farmer next door grumbles that there are more stones than soil in his fields, and you wonder if he has ever once said something cheerful. Historians still debate whether Domremy was truly peaceful or merely wearing a mask, while war and heavy taxes tighten their grip around the countryside. But right here, right now, all you sense is the mist and the warm fragrance of bread pulled fresh from the oven. Here's a curious little detail. The village had a goose with a reputation. Not just any goose, it specialized in stealing pot lids and parading around like some feathery thief lord. You could swear this morning it's staring straight at you with a smug look that says, "Hope you like sleeping outdoors tonight, pal." You perch on the stone rim of the well, dipping your fingers into water cold as steel, while the church bells toll again, slow, insistent, as if they know you're trying to steal 5 more minutes of sleep. And you laugh quietly because you realize that Joan's still just a peasant child, hears the same bells echoing in her ears. The scene blurs at the edges, like even the sun itself is undecided about waking up. You trudge into the fields of Lorraine, where the earth is damp, crumbly, and just stubborn enough to remind you it doesn't care about your schedule. Rows of wheat bend in the breeze like polite soldiers practicing yoga. A hoe rests heavily in your hand, the wooden handle splintering into your palm, and you wonder how anyone has the patience to do this for hours without inventing the modern podcast. Joan's family isn't rich, just steady like most peasant households here. The day starts with bread, onions, and maybe cheese if the cow felt generous. Then it's out to the fields, plowing, sowing, weeding, repairing fences, praying the goats don't find creative new escape routes. You unlucky guest in this century are assigned to chase crows. Congratulations, you're basically medieval scarecrow intern. The neighbors gossip across the furrows. One complains about taxes so crushing they make modern rent prices look merciful. Another grumbles about soldiers marching somewhere beyond the hills, though details change with each retelling. Historians still argue whether Domremy was more sheltered from war or constantly on edge. You just know that while they mutter, you're swatting at a particularly bold crow that seems to have tenure here, Here's an odd little fact. Medieval farmers sometimes tied bits of cloth to poles in the fields, convinced the fluttering rags would terrify birds. In practice, the birds probably just thought of it as free medieval performance art. You tie one rag yourself, and surprise it flops pathetically in the breeze about, as intimidating as a laundry accident. As the sun climbs, the smell of tilled soil thickens, sweat beads on your forehead, sliding slowly down your temples, salty and gritty. Your bare feet sink slightly into the damp earth, cool in the morning, but promising blisters by afternoon. You wave lazily at Joan's older brother, who's hacking weeds with grim determination. His scowl says, "If you slack off, I'll tell Mom." In the middle of it all, Joan herself is gathering sticks with quick, purposeful steps. She hums a tune, half hymn, half something she just made up. You pause, realizing how naturally she belongs here, how her rhythm matches the land itself. The hours stretch long and golden until your eyelids droop. The whisper of wheat, the drone of bees, and the occasional goat complaint weave into a lullaby. You lean against a fence post, and it creaks dangerously under your weight. The world narrows just soil, sky, and the sense that even in this ordinary routine, something extraordinary is quietly waiting beneath the surface. The day softens into evening, and you wander back from the fields, your legs coated in dust, your mind drifting in that hazy space between hunger and sleep. The sky deepens into lavender, and the hedgerows along the path grow thick with shadows. That's when you hear it, something that doesn't sound quite like wind or birds or the endless gossip of frogs in the marsh. It's softer, layered, like voices woven into the twilight. You stop, tilt your head, and for a moment you're convinced the hedges are practicing choral music. Not bad either, better than the neighbor who insists on humming half a psalm off-key every night. You rub your eyes, wondering if fatigue is turning the rustling leaves into a medieval surround sound system. Historians still debate when Joan first began hearing her famous voices. Was she a child of 12 younger? Later, some accounts insist it began here in quiet fields at dusky hours like this. Others argue memory blurred with myth. But standing here with the glow of fireflies blinking like lanterns strung along invisible threads, you can feel how easy it is for a tired mind to lean toward wonder. A quirky fact, villagers in Lorraine sometimes claimed hedgerows were haunted by good spirits who guarded crops. The only problem, those same spirits allegedly demanded payment in the form of milk left out overnight. Which means you may just be listening to a hedge full of lactose-intolerant ghosts. Joan doesn't flinch. She pauses too, her bundle of sticks pressed against her chest, her eyes lifted toward the sound. She doesn't run. She doesn't laugh. She just listens quiet and steady, as if she already knows the world is trying to tell her something important. You realize that's the difference. Where you hear strangeness, she hears purpose. A dog barks somewhere far off, yanking you back to earth. The last smear of sunlight drains from the horizon, and suddenly the voices are gone, replaced by the ordinary rhythm of crickets and the shuffling of your own steps. The night deepens heavy and blue, and you walk beside Joan back toward the village. The hush between you is not uncomfortable, it's expectant, as though the world has just shared a secret and is daring you not to forget it. Morning slips into afternoon, and you escape toward the Moose River, eager for a break from wheat fields and chores. The river glints in the sun like a sheet of moving silver, and dragonflies patrol the banks with the smugness of tiny nights. You tug off your shoes if you were lucky enough to have them, and let your bare feet sink into the mud. It's squishy cool and guaranteed to stain every scrap of fabric you own. Children gather here after their work, and Joan is among them. She's younger than most, but quick to laugh, her voice carrying over the water. The older boys are trying to lash together a raft from logs and twine, swearing it'll float this time. You can practically hear the future headline, "Local Youths Invent Disaster at Riverbank." Historians still debate how much free play children like Joan really had. Some argue peasant kids were miniature adults, bound to chores from dawn to dusk. Others believe laughter and games by the river were essential slices of life, tucked between labor and prayer. You sitting here on the grassy slope are rooting for essential slices of life. A curious fact, in some parts of France, kids would carve little wooden shoes and race them downstream like boats. Today, someone tosses a rough-hewn clog into the current, and it immediately flips upside down, becoming a very efficient submarine. The crowd roars with laughter. The makeshift raft, meanwhile, teeters uncertainly. Joan watches with wide eyes, then wades in up to her knees, steadying a log with surprising confidence. "It'll hold," she insists. You're less optimistic. When three boys clamber aboard, the contraption groans like a dying cow and collapses spectacularly, dumping everyone into the shallows. Water splashes, shrieks echo, and you can't help but laugh so hard your stomach hurts. Joan, dripping and smiling, shakes her hair back defiantly. She looks more alive than anyone else, as if this chaos is exactly where she belongs. The sun lowers, the river glows amber, and your eyelids grow heavy. Dragonflies hum their lullaby, frogs grumble like tired uncles, and you let yourself drift with the current of sound. The church bell tolls again, pulling you away from the riverbanks and herding you like every other villager toward the little stone chapel at the center of Domremy. Its walls lean slightly inward, as though the building itself is trying to bow in prayer. Inside, the air smells of beeswax smoke and the faint tang of damp stone. You shuffle onto a wooden bench beside Joan, who folds her hands neatly in her lap. The parish priest, a round man with a voice that slides between lullaby and thunderclap, begins his sermon. He speaks of saints of holy duty, of the eternal fight between good and evil. Half the congregation listens devoutly, the other half secretly calculates how long until supper. You, being practical, are already wondering if goats count as an excuse for early dismissal. Historians still debate whether Joan's priest was more of a strict disciplinarian or a warm spiritual guide. Some records show him emphasizing obedience. Others hint at storytelling flair that might have inspired a girl to see the world differently. Tonight, he spins a tale about St. Michael descending with a flaming sword, his words ringing against the stone walls, sparks flying in the imagination. Here's a curious detail. Medieval priests often sprinkled sermons with local gossip. Between mentions of angels, he warns against stealing cheese from neighbors' sheds, which suddenly feels very targeted. You glance around the pews. Everyone looks innocent except the goose tied outside honking suspiciously. Joan leans forward listening, as though each word were a personal invitation. You catch the way her brow furrows, the way her lips part slightly as if she's memorizing every syllable for later. For her, this isn't just another Sunday, it's a doorway to something larger. The candles flicker, shadows sway along the walls, and your own head starts nodding despite yourself. The priest's voice drones on steady and rhythmic like a medieval sleep playlist. You imagine slipping sideways off the bench and dozing against the cold stone floor. But just as your eyes close, the priest raises his voice. And some are chosen, the echo reverberates. Joan straightens sharply. You blink awake, startled, the words lodging in your mind like an unexpected riddle. The service ends, villagers shuffle out, and evening air rushes in cool and fresh. Joan lingers a moment, still caught in thought, her gaze fixed on the crucifix above the altar. You realize that for her, this wasn't simply a sermon, it was fuel for a future none of you can yet imagine. The morning sun pulls you toward the village market, a patchwork of stalls scattered along the dusty road. The air is thick with competing smells, sharp goat cheese, fresh bread, smoked fish, and less appealingly, a donkey who clearly did not read the memo about bathroom etiquette. You tug your cloak tighter, trying to look purposeful, though your main goal is simply to survive without being trampled by chickens. Joan walks just ahead, carrying a small basket. For her family, market days are a mix of necessity and spectacle. Coins are scarce, so most exchanges involve barter wool for onions, eggs for salt, a promise of labor for a wedge of cheese. The shouts of bargaining ripple through the air like competing trumpets. Historians still argue whether rural markets like this one were vibrant centers of trade or modest affairs barely sustaining village needs. Some records describe overflowing goods. Others suggest these gatherings were more about community chatter than commerce. Either way, your ears confirm it. Half the stalls are gossip booths with props. Here's a quirky truth. Medieval shoppers often tested fabric quality by chewing it. Yes, chewing. You witness a woman gnawing on a strip of linen while the merchant looks on proudly as if she were sampling fine wine. You make a mental note never to buy pre-owned medieval clothing. The market is a stage of characters. A toothless man sings badly about St. Denis while trying to sell questionable sausages. A fortune teller waves cards painted with saints promising insight for the price of a chicken feather. A boy runs past balancing 3 apples and collides with you, gifting you an accidental bruise and no apples. Joan seems unfazed. She studies everything, the colors of the fabrics, the weight of coins exchanged in hands, the arguments over whether last week's eggs were fresh. She's not just learning to shop. She's learning how people move, what they value, how they speak. When they think no one important is listening, at one stall, a spice merchant shows her a tiny pouch of saffron, brighter than sunlight, rarer than treasure here. He brags it came from across the sea, worth more than its weight in silver. You lean closer, inhale and sneeze so loudly a dog barks in protest. Joan giggles, her laughter soft, but undeniable. As the morning wears on, you grow heavy with fatigue, The clamor of voices fades into a warm buzz like bees circling your thoughts. Joan grips her basket, her eyes shining with curiosity, while your own eyelids grow heavier than the stones lining the street. The market swirls colorful and chaotic until it becomes almost hypnotic. After the bustle of the market, you climb the winding path that snakes toward the old castle on the hill. Its stones are gray and weary, patched with ivy, and leaning slightly as though centuries of war stories have weighed it down. Chickens wander too close to the crumbling gate, pecking bravely where knights once strode. For you, this place feels like a ruin. For Joan, it is a stage for imagination. She looks up at the jagged walls, eyes alight as though expecting banners to flutter and trumpets to blare. The air carries a faint smell of moss and damp wood, along with the silence of something half forgotten. Historians still argue over whether castles in Lorraine at this time were lively seats of noble power or neglected husks. Some records hint at lords hosting feasts here. Others describe the stones as already collapsing symbols of fading feudal order. Standing here, you could believe either story. The ruin looks both majestic and exhausted. Here's an odd little fact. Children often treated ruined castles as playgrounds, climbing stones not meant to be climbed, daring each other to find ghosts in shadowy corners. Joan leads you toward a staircase, missing half its steps, daring you with her grin. You hesitate, glancing at the drop below, already composing your excuse. Sorry, I can't climb. I've got 15th century insurance issues. You perch instead on a broken wall, watching as Joan darts between archways. She pretends to wield a stick as a sword shouting commands to imaginary soldiers. Her voice echoes off the stones, filling the ruin with new life. For a moment, you swear you can almost see the shimmer of armor, hear the phantom clang of steel. The breeze picks up, tugging at your clothes, fluttering through empty windows like banners long torn away. Joan doesn't notice. She's caught in the rhythm of command, directing invisible troops against invisible foes. You realize this is more than child's play. This is rehearsal. A stone tumbles loose under your hand, startling you with its sudden clatter. Dust rises, catching the sunlight in golden motes. The ruin seems to sigh old and tired, but still listening. Joan looks up at you, her smile wide and mischievous, as if daring you to join the game. And as you watch her, the castle no longer feels abandoned. It feels alive again, rebuilt in her imagination, waiting quietly for her destiny to match its stones. Night settles over Domremy, and you duck into Joan's home, a low-timbered house, glowing with the warm breath of the hearth. The air is thick with smoked bread baking and the faintly sour scent of sheep wool drying near the fire. You take a seat on a rough wooden stool that creaks so loudly it feels like it's tattling on your every move. The family gathers close. Joan's mother spins wool with patient hands, the spindle whirring softly like a sleepy cricket. Her father mends a harness leather, squeaking under the pull of his awl. The older children swap chores for gossip, whispering about who tripped over the goat today and whether the goose has learned to open doors again. Historians still debate how much reading and storytelling reached peasant households. Some argue that oral tradition carried most of the family's learning, while others insist that parish priests or traveling friars introduced scraps of scripture and tales. What you see tonight is a mix of psalm, half sung, half mumbled, followed by a story of a knight who got lost because he trusted a donkey for directions. Here's a quirky detail: in medieval households, pets and livestock sometimes lived under the same roof for warmth, which explains why a goat has just wandered in, plopped itself beside the fire, and now looks more dignified than you do. Joan giggles, leaning against her mother, her eyes bright as the flames. The hearthlight flickers across rough walls, painting shadows that dance like clumsy jesters. Bread crusts crackle as they toast near the embers. You chew on a piece, the flavor simple but grounding earthy in a way no modern snack could replicate. The warmth seeps into your bones, dulling the edges of the day's work. Joan hums softly, weaving her own tune into the crackle of firewood. Her siblings join in tapping spoons against bowls, creating a kind of accidental music. You laugh quietly when the goat bleats on cue, as though auditioning for the choir. As the night deepens, conversation slows into murmurs. The fire pops, once startling you awake, then settles into a low glow. Joan leans forward, staring into the embers as if they hold secrets. You catch the way her face softens, her focus drawn inward, as though she's already dreaming while still awake. And you, lulled by the warmth, the laughter, and the occasional goat chorus, feel your own eyelids tugging down. The room is quiet now, the fire reduced to a hush of glowing coals. You shift on your stool, the heat sinking into your legs, while shadows stretch like sleepy cats along the beams. Joan, curled in a blanket near the hearth, breathes slow and steady, and then, without warning, her eyelids twitch. You notice at first that flutter like a moth's wing. Her breathing deepens, and a faint smile appears, the kind you wear when something delightful slips into your dream. You lean closer, curious. Joan murmurs barely audible words you can't quite catch, though you think you hear something about voices and light. Historians still argue over when her visions began. Some place them in her early teens, others suggest a much later age. But here, in the quiet of Domremy, you catch the earliest flicker of something strange. The quirky part, medieval dream interpretation manuals were basically bestsellers. People believed that what you dreamed on a Friday night was more powerful than anything on a Tuesday because, apparently, God liked weekends better. A cow walking into your dream might predict wealth or just indigestion. Imagine paying a fortune teller to decode why you dreamed about chasing bread across a river. Joan stirs again, clutching her blanket. In the wavering glow, her lips form silent words, her face lifted toward the rafters. You tilt your head, wondering if she's whispering to saints or just demanding more cheese. The goat, stretched out lazily nearby, lets out a grunt as though volunteering to interpret. The fire cracks suddenly, tossing a shower of sparks into the air. You flinch, but Joan doesn't. Her face shines with a peace that feels older than her years. For a moment, the whole room bends around her smoke, curling upward like incense shadows, clustering as if to listen. The debate among scholars remains: were these visions divine or shaped by the religious and political storm swirling around France? Did she hear celestial voices or the echo of sermons, bells, and chants woven into her imagination That question hangs over the centuries, unresolved yet irresistible. You let out a soft chuckle at the absurdity of it. The rest of the family snores, the goat dreams about stealing laundry, and here you sit, watching history shift in its pajamas. Joan's breathing steadies her small hand, loosening on the blanket. The house sighs with her. Whatever dream carried her just now, it slips away like mist. The embers pulse faintly like the heartbeat of the room itself, and you, drowsy, warm, and just a little bewitched, find yourself pulled into the rhythm of her strange dreams, half wondering what they'd mean if they were yours. The bells ring, and suddenly Domremy is alive. You step into the village square with Joan trotting beside you, her braids bouncing as she tries to keep up. Today is no ordinary day. It's festival time, and even the chickens seem to strut with pride. You're wrapped in a hum of voices, the smells of roasting meat and spiced cider drifting through the air. A fiddler saws away at his strings, producing music that makes everyone grin, even if it sounds like a cat protesting bath time. Joan's eyes widen at the swirl of dancers stomping in a circle, skirts flashing, boots thumping against the dirt. Historically, we know Joan grew up in a community that celebrated feasts of saints, village fairs, and seasonal gatherings. These were rare escapes from the grind of farm life, and yet the quirky, detailed medieval festivals sometimes included contests like throw the piglet or catch the greasy pole. Imagine slipping off a pole covered in lard in front of your neighbors while a priest pretends not to laugh. Joan doesn't throw pigs, at least not today, but she does clutch your sleeve and pull you toward the games. You watch her try a turn at a hoop toss, concentrating so fiercely her tongue pokes out at the corner of her mouth. The hoop wobbles, then clinks against the stake. She cheers like she's conquered half of France. Meanwhile, the grown-ups gather around barrels of ale, their jokes punctuated by bursts of laughter that shake the rafters of the temporary tent. A traveling storyteller spins a yarn about Charlemagne, exaggerating so wildly you half expect him to leap from the crowd in person. Here, historians still debate whether Joan's fiery sense of purpose came partly from these moments being steeped in tales of heroes, saints, and divine missions retold with every festival. Did the rhythm of drums and bells prepare her heart for the cadence of heavenly voices? Or was it simply the normal pulse of rural France? You can't help but smile at the thought. Joan, sticky-fingered from a honey cake, looks up at you with shining eyes. For her, this is more than a fair. It's a glimpse of another world where joy and meaning collide, and stories spill like wine from an overturned cup. The music swells the fiddler, nearly breaking his bow in half from enthusiasm. Joan dances in the dust, her laughter weaving into the melody. For a brief moment, you feel it too, the sense that even the smallest village on an ordinary day can hum with the weight of destiny. You lean back against a fence, letting the evening light drape itself in gold across the square. Children run past their laughter, chasing the setting sun, while Joan's small figure glows in the last rays. She's not a saint, not yet. Just a girl with sticky fingers, a wide grin, and the faintest spark of something you can't quite name. And with that thought, your shoulders soften. The world slows, festival noises blur into a gentle hum, and your own breath begins to match the rhythm of the fiddler's last tune. The festival warmth fades into memory, and winter clamps down like a heavy door. You step outside with Joan at your side, and the world is hushed, blanketed in snow that glitters under a pale frozen sky. Your breath hangs in the air like a ghost, and every sound the crunch of boots. The creak of wooden shutters feels sharpened against the silence. Joan tugs her cloak tighter. She's smaller than the bundled villagers, and you can see her cheeks reddening against the cold. The doorknobs of life in Domremy don't pause for snow. Chickens still need feeding, goats still bleat for hay, and firewood must be hauled from the frosty woods. You bend your back with her pulling kindling in a sled that squeals like a badly tuned fiddle. Historically, Joan's childhood overlapped with a climate period scholars call the Little Ice Age. Harsh winters were common, and they left entire villages struggling. This wasn't just cold, it was survival practice day by day. And yet the odd detail that stands out. Some villagers believed that if you burned nettles in your hearth, it would keep witches from freezing your crops. So yes, people actually gathered bundles of weeds to fight bad vibes. Joan doesn't bother with nettles. She's too busy trudging through the snow, balancing a basket of turnips with comical seriousness. She slips catches herself and mutters something under her breath that sounds suspiciously like the medieval French version of seriously. You can't help but chuckle. The cold shapes everything. Bread hardened so much you joke it could serve as a weapon. Even the ink in the priest's pen freezes, leaving his sermons dotted with blobs of nothing. Families crowd around hearths, telling stories of saints and miracles, letting the glow of the fire stretch farther than its warmth ever could. Joan listens, her face flickering with light, her mind turning over these stories as if each spark held a secret. Historians debate whether winters like these planted seeds of resilience in Joan. Did months of trudging through snow, shivering in drafty cottages, prepare her to endure far worse on campaign? Or was she simply a child, learning to survive unaware of the strength she was storing up? One evening, you sit with her by the fire. The wind howls outside like a pack of wolves rattling the shutters. Joan traces shapes in the ash with a stick, drawing little houses, a horse, maybe even a sword. She doesn't explain, but you catch the glint of imagination in her eye. It's a look that says, even in the dead of winter, her mind is galloping elsewhere. A neighbor stops by stamping snow from his boots, grumbling about frostbite. He waves a chunk of rock-hard cheese like it's proof of cosmic injustice. Joan laughs so hard she nearly falls off her stool. Somehow, even in a season that tests every nerve, there's humor tucked into the cracks. You pull your cloak closer, watching the snow pile high against the doorway. Outside, the world is white, heavy, endless. Inside, the fire dances, the laughter carries, and Joan's spark flickers in the shadows. She's still just a child in a cold village, but you sense something warming beneath the surface. The storm will pass. Winters always do, but the strength it leaves behind, that lingers like a scar, or perhaps like armor. Morning breaks with a pale mist hanging over Domremy, the snow already softening into rivulets that snake down the village paths. You're walking beside Joan, when the faint sound reaches your ears. Distant at first, then clearer, each strike echoing across the fields like a hammer against the sky. The church bells. Joan stops. Her head tilts as though she's catching a melody too subtle for the rest of you. To most villagers, the bells mean obvious things. Mass at dawn, weddings wrapped in candlelight, funerals where boots drag heavily in the mud. But to Joan, it's something more. Her eyes close for a moment, her lips parting slightly, and you can almost see the sound sinking deeper into her bones. Historically, bells carried enormous weight in medieval life. They weren't just alarms or timekeepers. They were believed to chase away storms, ward off evil, and even cure illnesses if you stood beneath them long enough. Villagers sometimes insisted the very vibrations of a bronze bell could drive out demons. So imagine one clang, and somewhere a goat sneezes its last demon out. Joan listens differently. The bells seem to braid themselves with her earlier dreams. You watch her fingers curl at her side as though she's holding invisible threads. "Do you hear them?" she whispers, and for a second you almost want to lie and say yes. The quirk of it. Not all bells rang true. Poorly cast ones produced notes so flat that people called them devil's bells. There's even a record of a bell so badly made it summoned more laughter than reverence. Joan's bells, though, seem to strike perfectly. Each chime folds into the air like a piece of golden cloth settling softly over the valley. Historians still puzzle over whether Joan's visions began with voices alone or if bells' chants and church music helped trigger them. Could the resonance of sound have opened the door to her experiences? Or is that just modern scholars trying to retrofit neuroscience onto a girl's faith? The villagers treat the bells as background noise. A farmer yawns, adjusts his cap, and trudges on. Children chase each other, slipping in melting slush, oblivious to the soundscape around them. But Joan stands still, utterly still, the kind of stillness that makes you uneasy. You swear the sunlight bends toward her face for just a heartbeat. The bells toll again, and you notice something. Joan's expression is neither joy nor fear. It's resolve, quiet, unshakable, though she has no army yet, no banner, no armor. Just the sound of bronze carrying across the valley, ringing into her memory. She exhales slowly, a visible puff in the chill air. Then, without explanation, she takes a step forward. You follow, though you're not sure why. The bells fade as you walk, but the echo stays lodged in your chest like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to you. It feels absurd, almost funny. You've heard bells your whole life and never thought twice. But when Joan hears them, the entire horizon shifts. And you, trudging behind her, can't help but feel you're walking into the sound of destiny. The evening fire burns low, and the chatter of the household takes on a sharper edge. You sit on a bench against the wall, pretending to fuss with your boots, while Joan's parents exchange glances over a pot of stew. It's the kind of silence that says, we need to talk, but not in front of the children. Except, of course, Joan is right there, soaking in every word. Her father frowns. He stirs the pot too vigorously, splashing broth onto the hearth. "The girl is different," he mutters. Her mother sighs, smoothing her apron. She doesn't disagree. Joan is 12 now, still dutiful, with chores still obedient. Yet she drifts. She listens to bells as if they speak her name. She wakes with whispers on her lips. The neighbors notice, and neighbors in a medieval village notice everything. Historically, families worried less about a child's imagination and more about survival. A daughter was meant to weave to cook to prepare for marriage or convent life. A girl who stared into the distance as if hearing invisible voices that stirred unease. Superstition was thick in the air. A whiff of strangeness could be enough to spark gossip about spirits, or worse. The odd detail medieval parents sometimes hung garlic above a child's bed to protect them from night-stalking demons. Imagine your mom saying, "Don't worry, honey, the garlic necklace will keep the monsters away." Joan never had garlic beads, but her parents whisper as though they wish her strangeness could be warded off so easily. Her brothers tease her not cruelly, but nervously. "Oh, Joan, tell us what the bell said today." One joke's throwing a crumb of bread across the table. Joan doesn't answer. She lowers her gaze, tracing a circle into the wooden surface with her fingertip, as though carving out her own private orbit. The scholars still debate. Did her family support her visions, or did they push against them? Accounts vary. Some say her father threatened to drown her if she left home without permission. Others suggest her mother nurtured her spirituality quietly. Either way, you can feel the tension here, a rope pulled taut between love and fear. You clear your throat trying to lighten the mood. Well, at least she's not drawing goats in the ashes again, you mutter. Joan's lips twitch, almost a smile, but her father doesn't laugh. He mutters about danger, about neighbors talking too much, about soldiers still roaming in distant towns. The room feels heavy, not with anger, but with worry. Parents always worry, but in the 15th century, worry carried sharper teeth. A girl who stood out could attract the wrong attention from priests' lords, or worse, the ever-hungry gossip mill. Joan finally speaks, her voice steady, though soft. "I hear things that aren't bad." She doesn't look up, but you see the flicker of stubborn light in her eyes. Her mother's hand pauses on her apron. For a second, no one moves. Then her father sighs deeply, the kind of sigh that seems to empty his whole chest. The conversation drifts back to bread, to hay, to the price of salt. But the worry hangs in the air, unspoken, clinging like smoke. You glance at Joan. She's still tracing her invisible circle, unbothered, maybe even strengthened. You wonder if anyone else realizes the truth. Worry may surround her, but it doesn't confine her. She sits straighter, quietly glowing in the dim light, while the stew hisses softly over the fire. And you can't shake the thought the family fears what might happen if Joan keeps listening to voices. But maybe they should fear what would happen if she didn't. The church at Domremy is small, its stones rough and worn, as if they've been holding their breath through every storm. You push open the wooden door, the hinges squealing like a tired rooster, and step inside with Joan trailing close behind. The air is cool, scented, with candle wax and damp stone. Shadows cling to the corners like shy parishioners. The village priest is there, stooped over a ledger quill, scratching away. He looks up, eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of Joan. Not unkind, but cautious, the way a man regards a spark near a haystack. Joan bows her head respectful, though you notice her gaze flicks to the altar as if she's listening for more than the priest's words. Historically, parish priests in small French villages were often poorly paid, sometimes barely literate, but they held enormous sway. They baptized, married, buried, and mediated gossip. The priest in Domremy was no exception. And oddly enough, priests sometimes doubled as local weather forecasters, interpreting cloud shapes and bell tones as divine signs. Imagine your meteorologist doubling as your confessor. The priest clears his throat. "Joan," he says, his voice echoing faintly, "you've been different." His tone isn't accusation, it's inquiry, like a man prodding a sore tooth. Joan answers softly, "I hear things. The words hang in the air. You hold your breath." The quirk here, some priests in that era genuinely believed children could be vessels for divine messages. Others dismissed such claims as folly or worse, the work of devils. Which side was Domremé's priest on historians still argue. Some records suggest he quietly supported Joan. Others imply he kept his distance, wary of scandal. You watch his face carefully. His brow furrows, but he doesn't scold. Instead, he asks, "And what do you hear?" Joan doesn't elaborate. She simply says, "Voices, good ones." Her simplicity is disarming. No grand gestures, no theatrics, just a girl stating a fact like saying the bread is warm or the goat has wandered again. The priest sighs. He sets down his quill and leans back, fingers steepled. His silence feels longer than it is. Finally, he mutters something about prayer, about caution, about the dangers of attracting notice. He blesses her, though the gesture feels heavier than routine, as though he's weighing every movement. Scholars debate whether this priest recognized Joan's uniqueness early on or dismissed it as childish fancy. Did he see her as a vessel of God or a complication best left alone? We may never know. But you sense standing there in the cool air that he sees something. As you leave, the bells outside toll again, faint but insistent. Joan glances back at the priest. He watches her go, his face unreadable. You can't help but grin at the irony. Priests spend their lives waiting for signs. Yet when one walks out their door, they're not sure whether to call it grace or trouble. Outside, the sunlight strikes your face, dazzling after the dim interior. Joan walks ahead, cloak swaying. You follow, wondering what the priest truly thought and whether his silence was caution, disbelief, or a seed of faith he dared not water too soon. Evening falls again, stretching shadows across Domremy, and the village hum quiets into that peculiar stillness only small towns know. You walk the narrow path with Joan beside you, her steps slow, deliberate, as though each one is weighted with thought. The sky glows with the last threads of sunset, fading from gold to indigo. She hasn't told anyone everything, not her parents, not her brothers, not even the priest. You sense it, the way her gaze lingers on the horizon, the way she drifts in and out of conversation like a bird circling above, searching for the right place to land. Tonight, though, she leans closer to you, and the secret begins to take shape. Sometimes she whispers, the voices tell me things, not just prayers, not just bells. They tell me I have to do something. Her eyes glimmer in the dim light, not frightened, but alive. She's only a girl, 12 at most, yet her words carry a gravity that makes you shiver, despite the warm cloak around your shoulders. Historically, Joan's first reported visions involved St. Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret's celestial heavyweights of the Christian imagination. Scholars still argue whether she truly saw them in the fields of Domremy or whether the accounts were shaped later during interrogations. But here, in the quiet of the evening, it feels less like debate and more like certainty. The strange part, medieval saints often showed up in the most mundane places. People claim to see angels at market stalls, the Virgin Mary in a patch of butter, or demons hiding in the chimney smoke. If your toast had a funny mark, you might declare it holy. And yet Joan's voices weren't about trivialities. They asked for something larger, something impossible. She presses on her voice, hushed. They say France is hurting. That I must help. You nearly stumble. How could a girl in this tiny village, barely tall enough to carry a bucket of water, imagine such a task? You glance at her, searching for jest. But she's deadly earnest. Historians still puzzle. Did she truly believe this from the start, or did conviction grow slowly, shaped by her world of war and sermons? Was it divine mandate, or the wild courage of youth braided with faith? The question lingers like a moth in the lamplight, uncatchable yet persistent. Joan stops walking. She looks up at the stars just beginning to prick the sky. It's not for them to know, she says quietly, meaning her family, the priest, the neighbors. Not yet. She smiles faintly, almost mischievous, as if sharing a joke with the heavens themselves. You let out a low laugh, trying to ease the weight of her words. Well, at least the goat won't tell on you, you murmur. Joan chuckles, the sound quick and bright, and for a moment she is just a child again, her secret folded safely inside her. The night deepens. Crickets sing in the fields, the river murmurs in the distance, and Domremy sleeps unaware that history is stirring under its humble roofs. Joan walks beside you, a small figure with a secret too large for her size, and yet she carries it with astonishing calm. You glance at her once more before turning toward the cottage. She catches your eye, and though she says nothing, you understand the secret is not a burden to her. It is a promise.